Grand Rising, everyone. Natalie coming to live. Spirit and coffee. Salud. Ah, mhm. And it's almost, it's almost noon. So it's almost good afternoon. So just really excited that I have 2 more quarters until I graduate with my master's. Pretty exciting stuff. And for those who don't know, I'm getting a master's in psychology in consciousness and transformative studies. Okay. Consciousness and transformative studies. So that is a pretty deep conversation. And as you know, I'm a deep person and I talk about some pretty deep esoteric wisdom and spiritual alchemy and what that actually means and how do you apply it to your life and how do you move forward and all the good things. And a lot of spiritual alchemy is based on, these different processes or the elixir, right? What's the elixir to life? Like spiritual alchemy was like, how do we live forever? What is the elixir for immortality? How do we, you know, have a great, abundant life? And some people, they talk about the philosopher's stone. Um, Nicholas from Flamel, and that's kind of why I like Harry Potter because they talk about, how these philosophers came in and tried to understand what the elixir to life was, and how do you transcend, your soul into pure light? How do you transcend? And then it later became something different, of course, which is like how do we turn base metals into gold, which really wasn't the foundational reason for spiritual alchemy. So spiritual alchemy has many processes and there's many ways to get to the top of the mountain. And there's different processes, different ways to understand it, different perspectives, different alchemic processes from different philosophers, different psychologists. And in fact, you'll see that it is their alchemy that we're reading about. They're really trying to understand life and how they fit into the whole of it. One of the systems that we're looking at are working with is living systems, which is a new worldview that's arising. Now, I say new worldview, I don't think it's new. We're calling it new because we've sort of forgotten. So it's a remembrance of a system that we used to think back on. And living systems really is about the fact that we live in systems and they're organic and nature and how nature is an open system of ebb and flow of inputs and outputs of how we grow and these complex systems are sort of opened and arise from as we move forward. So it's almost like this organic evolution of how things are created. How does it organically happen in these open systems and enclosed systems? So inanimate, animate objects, meaning objects that are alive, objects that are not alive, objects that are self-generating, objects that are not. We, and this can help us to understand the worldview that we currently live in because it's very complex to talk about. And using language sometimes, people get lost in the language. We talk about a mechanistic worldview, and the mechanistic worldview really means that they think we work like machines, that the whole operation of our cosmos and everything was very mechanistic. It's like a machine, it's like a mechanics. And that gave rise to mechanics. And that's what we see now. We see mechanisms all over the place, but those are inanimate objects. They cannot survive if we were to go away. They don't grow organically. They grew out of our creativity, basically. And, for instance, a clock. If we didn't have clocks, if we, let's say humans went away, clocks wouldn't exist. We created the clock. And it's a very mechanistic way to look at the world, very mechanical way to look at time. So we have these kind of mechanics in the background. Now they go away. So for instance, if we created something like the TV or the technology that we've done, all of that is mechanism. Now, when we talk about the organic living systems of what is organic, would be self generated, right? That we can regenerate. These systems operate on their own without, um, you know, oiling the machine. In other words, they don't just decay so fastly. They will and can decay over time, right? But they don't. They can actually live, breathe, and thrive. And so, us as a whole system, as an organism, are a living system. And we have systems within systems. We have things happening, and I've talked about this before, in our body, systems in our body that are communicating, and we don't, who's communicating? Who's doing the communicating for us? We don't have to do anything. We're the thinking machine people. Thinking machine. We're the thinkers, but our body itself has the information and it's doing its thing without us even realizing it. We don't pay attention to it. Our heart beats and we don't tell it to beat, it just automatically does it. That is an organic system. And in living systems, we look at that. We look at that's a new worldview, to look at these natural systems that are organic and naturally occurring systems, where other systems that are mechanistic in the mechanistic worldview is a creation that we've created that will fall apart over time. So we have inanimate, animate objects, right? Self generating, self thriving. Now we have to give ourselves things in order to survive, like water and food and all that kind of stuff. But we can go on living, right? If we don't have water for quite some time, we can live for quite a while, not a whole lot, a lot. Food longer, breath not as much. We need oxygen, of course, to breathe. But living systems is about that thriving regeneration. Now, thinking about our bodies and how they heal, right? We're not giving instruction. If we cut ourselves, we are not the ones saying, hey, heal yourself. It naturally has the information in order to do that. It knows what to do. It's communicating, and we don't need to communicate. We don't even know what it's communicating. I mean, we can scientifically try to understand the codes and information that's happening in the body, but there's systems we don't even understand that are sending signals to that cut in order to heal. Okay, that's living systems. So if you're in this place where you're just in your spiritual evolution, you're trying to figure out these spiritual things, you have people that are, talking about, manifestation, the woo-woo stuff, all that stuff. And I talk about it too. I shouldn't even call it woo-woo, but we talk about that stuff. But if you want to dig deeper into understanding the systems that are at play, look at living systems as a worldview. That's a rising worldview. And it's a great worldview because what it helps us do is understand the interconnectedness to all living things. That when I pull from the thread, it's going to impact, hey, GP man, it's going to impact other parts of the web, that there's a ripple, right? The cause and the effect that they talk about all the time. There is a cause and an effect in everything that we do. We don't really understand how, because these systems sometimes are not evident to us. We're not really thinking about the systems that are in operation as we do something, the chain reactions that might happen. And there's a book that we're reading in this class. It's called Thinking in Systems. Now, it's kind of technical in my opinion. I'm reading it, I'm going, I don't know. This is sounds very mechanistic in my mind, but we will be talking about that later tonight about, my class, talking about, is this really a mechanistic worldview? I can see how it applies to living systems. I can see how it applies to how we might operate and generate in an organic system. But I can also see how they can use it in order to hike up the price of eggs, for instance. That's a big thing. They use these systems thinking in order to manipulate and in order to hijack prices or do whatever they're doing with the system. So for me, I'm not sure. I mean, systems thinking, I guess, is an approach to living systems. But if we want to look at living systems as an arising worldview, we would allow for the systems to actually naturally and organically evolve over time, which is kind of hard for human beings to do. We want to control everything. We're looking to control everything. We're looking to understand, and we want these outcomes to happen for people. We don't know how to let go and let evolve just naturally. That's not a function of a human being. A human being is trying to resolve issues. Perhaps we don't need to resolve. Perhaps we just need to just sit back and let it fall. But usually it's for our own comfort, right? We want to have our own comfort. But when we start to look at the systems and we start to look at how living systems work, then we can understand that we're a part of it. And if we don't do that, nature itself is going to tell us, yeah, it doesn't matter what you think, right? Because resources can run out, and resources may not actually be replenished as fast as they're getting take. So we know consumerism does that, right? Systems thinking, talks about that as well. Like, how are we putting back, to have a surplus or to find that homeostasis within the planet itself? Well, we can't really find what that balance is because there's so many other systems that are in operation that we are even unaware of, like bacteria and the things that we don't think about, right? Our metabolic rate, what's happening in our bodies, how we're expending or saving energy within our own self, within consuming energy from other sources that can't maybe regenerate as fast. For instance, lumber, that's a big thing, right? When we think of deforestation issues and we start to look at these biological issues that are occurring, that we are not the surplus, in other words, we can't regenerate the amount that we need, and we're overtaking. And I mean, this is an easy concept to understand, right? That we're over consuming, and it's not that earth itself can't regenerate it, it's that it can't do it fast enough. It's a process, it takes time. It's just kind of like if you're sick, your system, it can't function fully. It can't function to full operation. And sometimes you want to get out and do something, but you can't. You need more time. In other words, you can't go back to work as quickly as maybe they want you to go. And you're like, I need more time. I need more time to regenerate, to fuel up my stock so that I can move forward, because your body's trying to replenish itself. But that takes time to regenerate. It doesn't just happen like this. And so that's why we're facing these bigger issues in the world. It's because we're trying to control it. Now, they talk about oscillation, which I'm not 100%. Trust me, I am like throwing this out here. You guys read about it. I'm going to learn about it in my class tonight. But oscillation is like us trying to fix the problem and making it worse because we think that we need to input something, and then we don't really know what the output's going to be. And or we're restocking too much or not restocking enough. Now, overstock can cause an issue as well. And they talk about this in mortality and um, mortality rates, and then the birthing rates. So when we talk about like, okay, well, what's happening with population? Do we have enough people to operate the systems we currently have? And that becomes an issue, right? And sometimes there's over population where we have too many people, right? And so we're thinking, they've talked about that too. And so it becomes these systems, and I get it as a concept of really understanding, but I think it could be really exploited to drive up egg prices, right? So you're like, well, how is this interconnected? Because it all is. And they use systems thinking. And that's what I'm trying to get people to understand, that we can talk about, how bad the systems are, and we can talk about, the conspiracies and the this and the that. We know that the systems were not designed for everybody. They weren't. They weren't constructed that way. So we can, bitch about the governor in Arkansas, which I just found out, that's taking out Latinx, and we can, bitch about, oh, they're taking out the diapers. Well, it wasn't designed that way to begin with. The entire system wasn't designed that way. And bitching, and it's a losing fight in my mind. Okay, people can continue to do that, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's no win, because again, as we know, Einstein said, I think it was Einstein, please GP man if you know this and I'm wrong, you can't solve the same problem with the mind that created it. You can't solve the problem with the same mind that created it. We're trying to solve these issues within a system that wasn't designed for everybody. That doesn't even make sense, but yet we continue to do it. Part of the reason why is because people are stuck in the paradigm. They can't rise above it, they can't see above it, they're stuck in it, and they think that the change needs to happen inside the system. Well, that's incorrect. The system wasn't designed that way, so you can't really correct it inside the system. And I had a professor a long time ago, and I think I understand what he was saying. He's an epidemiologist. Totally makes sense what he said. Back then I understood it, but I understand even more today. Like, it hits me different. He's like, you can't fight a virus with a virus. And I was like, oh. So we're just like trying to like, it's basically like, trying to where what the virus is mutate, right? It's like, oh, here's a shot, maybe that'll fix it. That's not going to fix it. It's going to mutate into something different. You're just going to keep giving it shots. No, we have to do something different. We have to start thinking in systems. And this is for the individuals I feel that are in a expanded rate of consciousness. Individuals are at various ways of understanding consciousness, or various levels of consciousness, I will say. I hate to say levels because it assumes hierarchy, one's better than the other, and it's not. But when we expand consciousness, when we allow new concepts to arise within us, we start to see things from a very different perspective. And one way that you know that you're starting to outgrow these old systems is when you start to say, this doesn't fit as much. So when people get over their existential crisis, when people start to understand transpersonal experiences and people start to expand consciousness, they'll start to see systems. They'll start to want to give back. They'll start to understand that we're here to serve. They'll start to understand that we all need to like give our gifts back, but they'll also be able to open their mind to new perceptions and new worldviews. People who are closed off to new worldviews and ways of seeing the world are not ready to transcend and include. They're not there yet. And that's okay. That doesn't, some people may never want to expand their consciousness into a new worldview. That is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make them any less. It doesn't mean they're below. It just means that they're not able to see the new worldview. They're not able to accept this new worldview. And there could be a lot of reasons why. So gently, but people who are understanding, and even people who show up to the and stay on like you, GP man, are just really what's happening is that you're trying to understand how to move past these narratives into a new narrative, a new story. And it's not easy for people because guess what? People don't have a new story. They're trying to create a new story. The story doesn't exist yet, in fact. We're creating it as we go along. We've lived by narratives, old narratives. And if you go back mythologically, where we talk about, the beginning of time and how it started, and, these narratives that we do, because as human beings, that's what we do. We make up meaning about our place and space in this world. And you go back to those stories, those myth stories, those were the old ways and old worldviews. That's how we saw the world, and it evolved over time. Now, this new story that we're living under, we've lived under the patriarch story for a very long time. That's shifting. And it's scary for a lot of people because what they do is they take the patriarch and they make it wrong. And it's not wrong. It's just that it can't just be the patriarch, right? It has to be both. It has to be matriarch, patriarch, because we live in a duality. Our system is dual. Our bodies are dual. That's why we're always trying to go back to homeostasis. That's why, again, the living system is always looking for equilibrium because we need both to balance out. We're so off kilter. We're so off balance. And the mind that created that was the patriarch. That is, it's the mindset of the patriarch. Yeah, and we can't try to fix that. There's no fixing it. You have to create new systems. And the new systems don't need to deny that the patriarchy is important. It needs to include it. So it's an include and transcend. It's not an either or conversation. It's not, oh, the matriarch's better than the patriarch. Now, I was reading this passage from this other reading that we're doing in Living Systems, which is a pretty cool article talking about, what might have happened. And this is what I'm really interested in, is kind of like where where did it start? Where did we start to just forget about the matriarch? Because that's really what happened. We just sort of, I don't want to say we forgot about her. We sort of just stepped on her, trampled on her, and said she wasn't worthy, which is crazy. Like, for power, for whatever reason these individuals did it back historically, they kind of knew what they were doing. It was a planned out thing. They sort of just said, this doesn't matter. and they got away with it for a long time. They still are, but now nature is fighting back and saying you can't, because living systems tells us that if you extract too much from mother nature, she can't replenish fast enough. And guess who it hurts? All living species, including human beings. So we think we're above it and we're not. And so the old myth stories, when you go back, were based on goddess. They were based on the mother that changed and transcend over time into a god, which is a father. And then it became external. And then they inherently said, well, I'm a god, I'm a creator. And so now we see what we have in the world today. And it's sort of this evolution of what happened. Now, is it a person that did it? No, there was an energy. Something happened energetically that shifted the narrative. Maybe they didn't like the way the matriarch was running things. Maybe there was some issues going on, and who knows? The consciousness, though, of human beings thought that the matriarch was bad, terrible. Slay her, stomp her, kick her, step on her face. Who cares about her? She's not important. Then it became a gender thing. And so we see societies are not structurally designed for women. They're not designed for the matriarch, and they're never going to be. And if we keep trying to revise these structures to include the matriarch, it's a losing battle. I'm not even mad. I'm not mad at that governor, because I don't think from that perspective. When you start to think about systems, you go, well, it wasn't designed for us. Of course the system's that way. I'm not going to be mad. What am I going to do? Fight that? That doesn't even make sense. Recreate, redesign. That's what needs to happen. A whole new worldview, a whole new mindset needs to be constructed. Now, the new construction doesn't need to be all matriarchal, because that's crazy. And in fact, in a matriarch, it doesn't exclude the patriarch. And so this got me thinking about, motherhood, and I'm not mad. Good. I'm glad you're not mad. You can. So started to think about, how the motherhood, and how diversity is something that's a natural, inherent um, feeling from a mother, because as we have children, they could be girls or boys. We carry both genders in us, right? And so that diversity kind of lives within us. You don't know if you're gonna have a girl or a boy. You can't really determine that. I mean, you can go and do some scientific crazy stuff and say, well, I just want a boy or a girl. But if we allowed nature to do what it does, you don't know if you're gonna have a girl or a boy. It just, whatever naturally occurs in the womb is what happens, right? Now the seed might have instructions as to what it is, and we know that that comes from a male. So the seed is equally important as the woman cultivating that seed and that nurturing ground that we have. Okay. And you may get both. You're absolutely correct. But the diversity. And then it got me thinking about how men treat women, and what we've done to the mother, and how we've forgotten to really men, not as a whole, but I'm saying in the structures that were designed to program men to not nurture the very ground where they lay their seed, which is just kind of sad, because we would be the fertilized ground ready to receive these seeds, but yet they're stomping on the face of the very place where their seed is actually landing. And so we have this bigger system of mess, basically. And the seeds where they're landing are, when you think about the traumas of the women who are carrying these babies, who perhaps are single mothers, fathers not showing up, fathers not nurturing the very ground where they laid their seed. These children hold that trauma in them. So think about a seed that gets dropped in ground that's not fertile and nurtured, kind of like our food. If we have this food that's being grown in soil that doesn't have the nutrients, then when we consume it, it's toxic to our body. So these systems allow us to think on in different ways. And when we think about men and women as this ebb and flow of a system that's organic, that works like nature, that's regenerative, that can help create. And yet we are not putting ourselves in a place that is going to be fertile ground so that we can have offspring that arises and is able to be cultivated into this beautiful spirited light being. Well, we've created that through these systems. So symbols, language, I mean, I could go on a spiral of how it all interconnects. And our language and our structures, which are very patriarchal, right? They're all pyramids. That's a patriarchal symbol, and there's only one person at the top. I don't care how much you people want to fight the system, want to fighting the system ain't going to get you nowhere, because guess what? It wasn't designed that way. It was not designed that way. And the faster that we can come to terms with that and understand that and start to look at the bigger narrative that's happening and say, oh, shoot, we have totally discredited a very significant part of the story that needs to be added back. And that's what people are doing. Even scientists are freaking out. Everyone is, to be honest. And everybody's lost. They don't know which way to turn. They don't know what to listen to. There's 500 billion podcasts out there. People are like, find your light, find your inner joy, find your this, find your that. And it's like, okay, great. But within a system that doesn't allow it, how many people's minds really will be freed? How many people have the luxury of just pondering this stuff and living their best life on the systems that are currently created? Not. The majority of the population are not. Why? Because they're in a system that was designed that way. And trying to fight it is not going to get anywhere. Can't go wrong with spirit and coffee. Thanks, GP man. You know, it's just crazy. And there's so many ways to talk about it. But living systems, you guys, I'm telling you, it is the new worldview, new paradigm. So if you want to get out of the dialogues of conspiracy theory, and it's fine. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if that's where you're at. Eventually, it's going to lead you to the next phase. And in my case, spiritual alchemy, which everything should lead you to spiritual alchemy, because that's what it is. And that's what living system is, really. Living systems is another way to say spiritual alchemy. And they use different language and words in 500 million different ways to confuse the shit out of everybody. But when you start to look at it, you start to say, oh, yeah, we're just going back to the way it was, but it won't go back to the way it is. That's another thing, because we've already gone through this narrative of the patriarch. We need to accept what's next. And we get to stop stepping on the sacred mother, the cosmic mother. And we get to stop saying that it's just a male God, and God is a father, and that's that. And there's no mother involved. What are you talking about? There's an ebb and flow of everything. And so once we start to really learn to and even nurture ourselves. So as women, I think and I'm going to say this to the women on here, the women that are getting on here, whatever, in something I'm practicing and learning for my own self is to nurture ourselves, to be gentle with ourselves, to be kind with ourselves, to learn to love ourselves, because the soil that we carry can be nurtured by our own self, because we hold this space to do that. It makes me cry. Women hold this space to just have this beautiful soil and and love themselves and be kind and gentle and careful with ourselves, but also show up very powerfully, but at the same time accepting, right? We accept. And that's kind of where we need to go as a society. Not these old systems aren't going to work. So you guys, I don't know who's mad about the eggs. People bitch about the eggs, bitch about the this, bitch about that. And then I say, well, the system was designed that way. And if you look at systems thinking, they automatically use this stuff to manipulate the systems. And guess what? It works. It works for them. They don't get in trouble. Why? Because they designed the system that way. And if you want to go in and fight that system, good luck. It's not going to get you anywhere. You need to create new systems. You can't fight a virus with the virus. And if you want, if you want to give it a shot, if you want to go give it a booster shot or whatever, it's just going to morph into something different. It's not, you got to change the entire system. That's just it. And I can't stress that enough. There's no new alchemy needs to be created. And this is why it's hard for people to get out of those narratives, because we were also not trained to be innovative, to be creative, to understand how to design new systems. So guess what? It'll just morph into the same old thing. It's not going to change. Okay. You're not going to become, it's very rare that you'll become a CEO of a company that's already in place in operation. There's one person at the top. That person was specific. They were specific about who they wanted to be at the top, and they designed it specifically that way. So you can bitch about, the rights of women and this and that and the other, and then that's okay. Do it. You're not going to win. There's no winning in this game. It wasn't created to create a win-win. It wasn't a win-win game they created. They created a win-lose. And really a lose-lose, to be honest with you, because at the end of the day, the joke's on them. They're going to lose too if they continue with their crap, because guess what? Mother Nature at the end of the day and these living systems win, not us. So they kind of created a lose-lose situation, to be honest with you. And the sooner they get the memo and the message, the better off all humanity will be. But if they don't, we could be too far gone, right, as a species. And I talk about that all the time. So there you have it. We either gone too far. And, I say because we're crazy, it just doesn't have to be this hard. We can just respect each other. But of course, that's not what happens. You have these few people at the top that are just like, man, control freaks. I don't even know what's going on. My opinion, they need a hug, a long hug, like a hug, like you're not going to get out of this hug, like for a long time until you break down and cry or do something. Um, but, so the systems, bitch about them. Like I said, you can do that. You can go fight them, be an activist. That ain't going to get you anywhere. I don't care what you say. It ain't going to get you anywhere. It's a losing battle. It's a lose-lose. It's not a win-win. Um, and so if you understand the game, right? Even if you play the game, you can't play it to your optimal level unless you fit the profile of who it was designed for. It was designed in Mario Brothers. Mario or Luigi or whatever players were there to win the game were there to win the game. They were designed to win the game. You couldn't take the evil guys in there and say they're going to win the game. Right? And the end game was to win the game, right? So you could lose the game, of course, but they were never going to win the game, right? There were just like steps up to the final game of how do you win, right? And it's not that they won the game, these evil villains. They didn't win the game. They just ended your game. Because there was only one winner. It didn't say winner, it said game over. And that's exactly how we were designed. So, there's one person who gets to the top, and that's just that, and that's it. And it's always going to be that way until we figure out how to redesign and structure. So get into living systems. Whew, just went off a little bit. And then there's some other readings as well, the one about the goddess, and that's called I'll give you the name of it real quick. I think I still have it up. Yeah, it is Earth Dance, Living Systems and Evolution. Earth Dance, Living Systems and Evolution. A couple of books you can read there if you want to. And then there's also, we have Wicked and Wise. I haven't started reading that book yet, but will be soon. So again, remember, start to think about these systems in a bigger perspective rather than, being in the system itself and being a product of that system. Just try to allow yourself to think a little bit bigger into what is living systems and how can I recreate these systems rather than how do I fight these systems, because fighting the systems, again, it's not going to work. It wasn't designed for you. It wasn't. Even you. And you and you and you and you and like 99.9% of the population it wasn't designed for. So we have to recreate, and it's going to take a lot of us to recreate these narratives and these stories, to reconstruct. And it's so imperative that we do it now because honestly, people are freaking out. I don't think people really understand how freaked out they are, and they don't know what's next. They really don't. They have to create what's next. And if we don't create it, guess who's going to create it? They will, whoever they is. And we don't want they, because who are they to begin with? So there you have it. I hope this is super helpful. And really love you guys. If you guys need support, there's a lot to get through to get to the point where you accept a new worldview. It's not an easy process. And there's a lot of shit that we have to deal with in our own internal psyche and self in order to accept that, this world needs to be operating differently. It just does. Okay. Or it doesn't. And then we just die and it figures it out somehow. Okay. All right. So there you have it. Love you guys. Mwah. Have a fantastical day, and I will see you soon.